So in this lesson, we're going to look at the international system of units. And we're going to see how to use it. We're going to see how to convert units within it. We're going to look at a general kind of strategy for unit conversion that we're going to use throughout the rest of the course. It turns out that this strategy applied to unit conversion can be applied to many other kinds of problems as well. So that, remember, that was a basic theme in the course, problem-solving strategies. Now, I've been telling you that you should look at the objectives at the beginning of the lesson because they tell you what's going to be on the tests. So I thought I would give you some example questions here in the objectives to show you what kind of questions they are, or what the questions might look like that go with each objective. All right, so our first objective is to use scientific notation, and remind you about scientific notation really, because I think they cover this in 5th and 6th grade in grade school, but we'll go over it again like you haven't seen it since then. And you need to be able to write it down so that a human being can read it, and also you need to be able to use the notation that machines like to see. So when you're typing it into Excel or into a calculator, they're going to want you to type it differently than the way you type it on a piece of paper for a person to read. Here's an example over here of scientific notation. You have this number with a lot of zeros after it. It's kind of clunky, takes up a lot of space. You can pack it down and write it in scientific notation this way. This is the way people do it. And you'd enter it into Excel like this. You use a letter E for the times 10 to the part. And same thing with the calculator, except the calculator's got a key for doing that. So you should be able to take regular numbers and convert them into scientific notation after you do this lesson. And you also ought to be able to take scientific notation and turn it back into a regular number. I'm going to remind you of a couple of things about powers of 10 that you learned in grade school. It's pretty easy to do arithmetic with them. And it's possible to do arithmetic like this in your head. And it's a very useful thing to do because you can do back of the envelope calculations very quickly if you can do that. So I'd like you to practice that a little bit in this lesson. I'd also like you to be able to write down the base units in the international system. And there are 5 of them that I want you to know. I want you to know length, mass, time, temperature, and amount of substance. And there are base units that go with each of those measurements. There are 2 other measurements, current and luminous intensity. We're not going to use those in the course. They're in your textbook, but we won't really use them. So you don't have to know those 2. I'd like you to be able to take those base units and build units for almost any physical quantity if I give you the physical definition for the quantity. So I'm not always going to assume that you know what the physical definitions for all the quantities are. For example, look at this question here. I'll say, if density is mass per unit volume, now that one you should know, and that one we're going to hit a lot in the next worksheet. If density is defined as mass per volume, what's its SI unit? Well, you're going to take the SI unit for mass and divide it by the SI unit for volume, which is the SI unit for length cubed. So you'll be able to do that after you run through this lesson, I hope. The temperature unit in the SI system is a little different. It's the Kelvin, and we don't have any thermometers in the lab that read kelvins directly. Usually they read Celsius degrees. So I'm going to show you an easy way to convert between Celsius degrees and Kelvin degrees. Now, your book spends some time having you convert Fahrenheit degrees into Celsius degrees and then Celsius degrees into kelvins. All I want you to know are metric to metric conversions. You do not have to remember anything that is an English to metric conversion, and if I ask about those on the test, which I might, I would give you the English to metric conversion factors. But the metric to metric conversions are the important ones, and they're the ones that are most important in your book. Now, sometimes the base units are the wrong size for the job you're doing. If you're a biologist and you're talking about blood cells, those are on the order of millions of a meter. And you don't want to always be writing your measurements in millions of a meter. So it's more convenient to define a scaled unit like micrometers. Micrometers are millions of a meter. So we're going to talk about what we call SI prefixes to adjust the size of units to the job that you're doing so that you don't always have to be writing powers of 10 with everything if you use these prefixes. For example, here it's a lot easier to write 5 micrometers than it is to write that down. So you'll learn how to do that. To do that, you're going to have to memorize a table that contains the SI prefixes and the powers of 10 that go along with them. And I'll show you exactly which ones I expect you to memorize when we hit that. Now, we're also going to look at how you can pull a prefix off and put a new one on. And this is going to be an introduction to unit conversion in general, because we're going to use a recipe for doing this that we're going to find applies to a lot of other things besides this particular job. So if I say the speed of light in scientific notation is this, I can write it in a couple of different ways using the prefixes. Here's a prefix mega, capital M, which means a million. And here's a prefix giga, capital G, which means a billion. And I could write it either way, and if other people write it either way, I can recognize they're both really the same number. Finally, we're going to take this unit conversion recipe that we are using and generalize it and see that you can solve a lot more types of problems than just swapping SI prefixes from one measurement to another. Here's sort of a health sciences related one where you're calculating someone's BMI from their height and from their weight. You're using English units down here. The BMI is defined in terms of the SI units. So you're going to have to do English to metric conversions there and then put them together to calculate the person's BMI. And this will be the last problem actually that you do in this lesson. In the next lesson after this, we're going to take a whole bunch of common unit conversion problems that you're going to encounter as a healthcare professional when you're reading medical orders. And we'll see that this algorithm helps you read the medical order and calculate things like the flow rate for an IV bag and that kind of thing from it.